Welcome. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Malva Kundive. I'm the Programs Manager at SID-US. We really thank Heifer International for hosting us in this space today for this event. But today's event is co-hosted by the Food Security and Agriculture Workgroup and the Environment and Sustainability Workgroup. A little bit about SID-US, if you're not familiar with us, before we move it on to the co-chairs to kind of talk a little bit about the event today. So a little bit about SID-US. We are the largest and the most active chapter for the Society for International Development, which is an international network that was founded in 1957 to serve as a global forum dedicated to sustainable economic, social, and political development. We serve as a global town square for the international development community, bringing together people from diverse organizations, disciplines, and career stages in a neutral, independent forum to share information, discuss important issues and challenges facing our community. And we do that in a big way through a lot of our work groups and the co-chairs that facilitate these events. There are a few different ways that you can get involved with us. I don't know why this slide is blank. It does not pop up. I will just describe what the different ways are, but you can follow us on social media to see what our different activities are. We have annual events and regular events popping up all the time. So we have a lot of them scheduled for next year. So once you sign up, you'll see some, notices about what these events are. You can also sign up to be a co-chair or a workgroup associate, as our workgroup associate Alex here, and participate in our events and also help us facilitate events throughout the year as well. And you can sign up for a newsletter on our website. Our website has all the information you need, but if you have any questions, you can always reach out to us about any of the things that we do. There's some issue with the presentation. One second, wait.
It looks like a bounced job, maybe.
Perhaps, yeah, I can see the information on the side, but I can't see it on the screen here. Oh, there we go, okay. A few things to note, I'll just describe this. A few things to note for today, this is gonna be a recorded session and it will be shared publicly just so everyone is aware. You can find this on our YouTube channel and you can also find this on our website. Closed captioning for our virtual participants is available. You just have to turn it on from your own individual settings. We also have an interpreter today translating from Nepali to English. Unfortunately, we had to put it under the Chinese tab because we couldn't find the Nepali tab. So our virtual participants, if you would like to participate in the interpretation, please select the interpretation option and select the Chinese tab. And with that, I will actually move on to our co-chair. So moving on to Devon and Bell.
Great. Thank you so much. I'm really, really excited to do this session. It's on sustainable, regenerative, climate smart agriculture and smallholder farmers. These are topics that I'm super passionate about and very excited that we were able to get such an amazing panel. I am the chair of the Food Security and Agriculture Working Group at SID, the Society for International Development, along with my co-host, Adrian Bliss. He is the chair of SID's Environmental and Sustainability Workgroup. Adrian, do you want to introduce yourself really quickly? And then I'll...
Sure. As we mentioned, I'm the co-chair of the Environment and Sustainability Workgroup. I'm fairly new in the role. Alex here is an associate who's supporting our efforts, and we are in the process of recruiting a second co-chair. So this is my first event, which has been co-hosted with Bonner. In my day job, I'm with Mark McDonald. I sit in the International Development Services part of the business, where I am the Regional Sustainability Lead for our international development business, the Middle East and South Asia. And I also serve as the Deputy Portfolio Manager for our Climate and Environment portfolio as well.
Great. And so I am also the co-chair, but there's not another co-chair. So we are recruiting for a co-chair for both the Food Security and Agriculture Workgroup, as well as the Environment and Sustainability Workgroup. So contact SID for putting in your applications if you are interested. I am a Director of Programs and Business Development for the Asia region at Heifer International. And our first speaker is from Nepal, where Heifer has been continuously present and working for the past 25 years. And we have been supporting women's empowerment, economic development, combating hunger and poverty with sustainable, regenerative, climate smart agriculture. So today you are going to hear a variety of views from our speakers. We've got a smallholder farmer representative who also is a manager of a cooperative. You'll hear more about Ms. Delmaya in a minute. We have industry represented with Dr. Bronner's, and we have donors from USAID and the World Bank. So I think we've put together an amazing panel, and I'm really excited for you all to hear from them. So not much more from me. I will introduce Ms. Dilmaya Saru. She is the manager of the Nepal Shri Galda Smallholder Women's Cooperative. She has served as the cooperative manager since 2016, and she has been steering the cooperative with strong commitment to community development. I will happily turn it over to her and our translator, Anish. Connecting with them. So I should say while we're paused that it is 11 at night there. She has come from her village and traveled all the way in town to have better internet service, middle of the night for her. I really was so hesitant to have her do this, and she was very excited to speak to us today. So really thrilled that she's able to do and join our talk tonight for her. I'm going to message on WhatsApp and see if I can help.
Here's
Oh,
her.
good, excellent. Welcome, Mr. Maya.
Namaste.
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 नमस्कार मेरो नाम दिलमाया सारू हो म गल्दा सामाजिक
Namaste. My name is Dilmaya Saru. I work as the manager of Gavla Social Entrepreneurship Corporate Limited as the manager.
जलवायु मैत्री व्यवसायहरूको विषयमा
I would like to
प्रस्तुत गर्न अनुमति
get your permission to present the climate-friendly enterprises run by our cooperative in brief. Before joining the cooperative, we sisters were involved only in domestic chores. We were not organized in any group or social activities, and we were afraid to talk to anyone. We didn't have any savings, and it was difficult for us to even arrange 5 rupees. Later on, through the assistance of AFR, we were able to register our cooperative. Galda Social Entrepreneurship Women's Cooperative is located at Ward number 5 of Nisti Rural Municipality in Palpa district. It was registered in September 18, 2016, and currently there are 543 women share members in our cooperative. We have been running various enterprises such as goat enterprise and marketing, ginger production, processing, and its marketing, pulses production, and their marketing, as well as activities related with saving and credit. The total capital of our cooperative is USD 166,898, out of which USD 135,934 is given out as outstanding loan to 371 members of the cooperative. Out of the outstanding loan, 80% of it is used for the improvement in the agriculture, livestock, and other enterprises. Last year, the total transaction of our cooperative was US dollar 214,664, and the net profit was 9,629 US dollars. Before the establishment of cooperative, a majority of the farmers used to rear their livestock by taking them to the forest for grazing. The shelters weren't properly organized. Quality fodder and forage weren't available. Animal feed wasn't given in an organized way. Despite having the potential for ginger farming, farmers were facing losses due to lack of relevant skills and knowledge. Technology, quality seeds, organized collection and storage after production.
गुणस्तरीय सुठो पनि
There was a
उत्पादन गर्न
problem in
सक्ने
organized
गरी
marketing
व्यवस्थित
due to the lack
भण्डारणमा
of good
समस्या
quality
थियो।
dried ginger resulting from the
गाउँठाउँले
drying done
अदुवा
by use of
पोल्दा
firewood.
धेरै श्रम लाग्ने, आगोमा काम गर्न गाह्रो हुने,
Using
अदुवा
firewood to
पोल्दा
dry the
र
ginger
मानव
was labor
स्वास्थ्यमा
intensive and it was difficult to
अदुवा
work near fire.
पोल्दाको
The
धुवाँले
smoke coming
मानव
out of
नाक
the
पखेरुमा
fire while drying the
असरकारी
ginger
स्खलनको समस्या
caused
पनि गरेको,
problems of
मैला
asthma.
कुरा लाग्ने हुँदा
And
मानिसलाई
since lots of
बन्नुपर्ने
firewood
अवस्था
was
थियो।
used in it, it resulted
हाल
in
सहकारी
deforestation.
र सहकारीका सदस्यहरूले यस
Currently, the
क्षेत्रमा
cooperative and its
बस्तीका
members are
पालन
running programs such
अर्ग्यानिक
as
अदुवा
improved goat
खेतीको
enterprise,
उत्पादन र उत्पादकत्व
organic
विज्ञान
ginger
प्रयोग
production,
गर्ने
and
लगायतका
increasing the
कार्यक्रमहरू
productivity overall.
सञ्चालन गर्दै आएका छौँ। वातावरण मैत्री
Similarly,
अदुवा प्रशोधनका लागि
solar
सोलर
plants have
ब्यारेल
been
वितरण
installed
गरेका
for
छौँ। बजारमा
environment-friendly ginger
अर्ग्यानिक
drying and
कृषि उत्पादको
processing.
मूल्य उच्च
The
हुनु
high demand
हाम्रो
and
लागि
price
एउटा
value of
अवसर
organic
थियो,
agriculture produce
जसका
in the
लागि
market was an
बाख्रा
opportunity for
पालनका
us.
लागि उन्नत जातका
Addressing this, we have
घाँसका
developed
विकास गरेका
improved
छौँ।
species of fodder
व्यवसायको
and
गोठ
forage for goat
निर्माण
enterprise.
र
We
पशुको
have
उचित
supported in the
व्यवस्थापन,
construction of
औषधि
improved animal
उपचार,
housing,
बिमा
appropriate
र
management of
बजारीकरणमा
livestock,
सहयोग
medical
गरेका
treatment,
छौँ।
insurance, and marketing.
बाख्रा पालनबाट
We have
निस्केको
been
मललाई
utilizing the
व्यवस्थित गर्दै
livestock manure
अदुवा खेतीमा
for organic
बहुखेतीको
ginger
प्रयोग
farming.
गर्दै आइरहेका छौँ र दुवै
We
फोहोर
have
मैला
been
नदिने
running these
एकीकृत रूपमा
enterprises by
सञ्चालन गर्दै
integrating them with
आइरहेका छौँ।
each other.
यस क्षेत्रको जैविक विविधतालाई अवसरका
272
रूपमा लिँदै
farmers from this
खोज
cooperative
सहकारीका
have
करिब
taken up
77 जना
the biodiversity of this
विशेषज्ञहरूले
region as an
सरकारी
opportunity,
सेक्टर
and they are
ग्रामीणमा
doing ginger
अर्ग्यानिक
plantation
अदुवा
in
खेती
40
गर्दै
hectares of
आइरहेका
land.
छन्। व्यवसाय विकासका लागि नेपाल
We have
सरकार
received a total of
बाट हालसम्म
USD
1,06,600
600,
अमेरिकी डलर
500
अनुदान प्राप्त
as
गरेका
grants
छौँ,
from the
जसबाट
Nepali government
हाम्रो
and
यस
HEFA.
सहकारीले सहकारीको फन्ड,
By utilizing
उपज
this,
ढुवानीको साधन, अदुवा
the
प्रशोधन केन्द्र,
the
सङ्कलन
cooperative
केन्द्र
building,
निर्माण गरेका छौँ।
agri-transport, processing center,
यसै
collection
गरी
center has
आवश्यक
been
उपकरण
constructed.
सहितको अदुवा प्रशोधन
Similarly,
केन्द्र छ,
we
जसमा
also have a ginger
अदुवा धुने,
processing center,
काट्ने
which
मेसिन,
comprises of
पानी
a
झार्ने
ginger
मेसिन,
washing and cutting
सोलर
machine,
ड्रायर,
water
पाउडर
testing
बनाउने
machine,
मेसिन,
solar dryer,
प्याकेजिङ गर्ने
powder
मेसिन छ।
machine,
बाख्रा
and
सङ्कलनका लागि
packaging
आवश्यक
machine.
पूर्वाधारहरू
We
छन्।
have
एउटा
necessary
बाख्राको
infrastructure for
सङ्कलन
goat
केन्द्र छ,
collection. We
अदुवा
have
तथा
a goat collection
खसी
center
बोका
as well.
सङ्कलन गरेर
We have been
बजारहरूमा
doing
माग
regular
प्राप्त गर्दै
transaction with ginger
आइरहेका छौँ।
and goat
अदुवाको
collection.
बजारीकरणका लागि गत वर्ष
For the
हामीले
marketing of ginger,
नेपालका
last year we
कम्पनीसँग
did
सम्झौता
an
गरी
MOU with
बजारीकरणको
companies in
काम
Nepal,
गर्यौँ, जस मार्फत
from
हामीले
which we
805
sold
केजी नेपालको
805
अदुवा प्रति
kilograms of
केजी
dried ginger
2.5
at the rate
अमेरिकी
of
डलरको दरमा
2.5
आयात
US
गर्यौँ।
dollar
गत
per
वर्ष
kg.
45 मेट्रिक टन
Last year, we
अदुवा
did a
खरिद
purchase
बिक्री
and sale of
गरेका
45
थियौँ।
metric ton
यस
of
वर्ष
ginger.
हामीले
This
1
year,
लाख
we have set
केजी
out a
अदुवा
goal to purchase
खरिद
and
बिक्री
sell
गर्ने लक्ष्य राखेका छौँ।
100,000
यस
kilograms of
वर्ष
ginger.
राष्ट्रिय तथा
Through
अन्तर्राष्ट्रिय
this,
कम्पनीहरूसँग
an MOU
सम्झौता गरिएको छ।
to sell
यस
10 metric ton of
मार्फत 10
dried
मेट्रिक
ginger
टन सुकाएको
would be carried
टाउकोमा
out by
80 मेट्रिक टन बिक्री गर्ने
getting into MOU
सम्झौता
with
गरिएको
various
छ।
national and international
छलफल
organizations.
भएका
This
कम्पनीहरूले
weight is
हाम्रो
approximately equal to
सहकारीको
70 to
आग्रह
80
र
metric
यस
ton
क्षेत्रको
of raw ginger.
किसानहरूसँग
The companies
सँग
which we have discussed with
भेटेर
have
छलफल
done the field
गरिसकेका छौँ।
monitoring and also have
यसरी काम
discussed with the
गर्ने क्रममा
farmers of
हाम्रो
our area.
यस सहकारीमा
While
भएका
doing our work,
छलफलहरू
we
छन्,
have
जसमध्ये
encountered some challenges.
नेपालमा
Some of
अदुवाको
them are
मूल्य स्थिर नहुनु,
lack of stable pricing in
वर्षैपछि अदुवाको मूल्य
Nepal when it
तलमाथि
comes to ginger. Each
भइरहनु,
year, there are fluctuations in
गुणस्तरीय
the
अर्ग्यानिक
price of
कृषिका
ginger.
विश्वसनीय स्रोत केन्द्र भेटिएको
Number
छैनन्,
two,
तर
a
हाम्रो क्षेत्रमा उत्पादन
credible
भएको
source center for
अदुवालाई
quality
छनौट
organic
गरी
seeds haven't
औषधि
been found yet.
बिउहरूमा प्रयोग गर्दै
However, we have been
आइरहेका
using
छौँ।
the ginger of our area
अर्ग्यानिक
as an
खेती
improved
गरेकाले
seed after
रासायनिक
selecting
दबाईको
them.
प्रयोग गर्न नहुने र गानो पुछ्याउने
Similarly, since it's an
रोगहरू
organic farming,
सताउने समस्या देखा
chemical
परेको छ,
fertilizers
तर
aren't being used. Hence, disease control
हामी
and
यस्ता
management has
ठाउँको
been a
परिचालन
problem.
गरी जैविक
But we
दिशाका
have been
अनुभव गर्दै
using the organic
आइरहेका छौँ।
fertilizers by
उचित पोषण
mobilizing the
विधिको
technicians.
प्रयोगमा कमी छ। अर्ग्यानिक सर्टिफाइड
Similarly,
वर्ष
there is a lack of
हरेक
use of
वर्ष
improved technology.
गर्नुपर्दछ। यो प्रक्रिया
Likewise, we need to have organic certification every year. It is a requirement. This process is a bit expensive for us. Similarly, we don't have adequate infrastructure for long-term storage. And there is also a lack of policy for organic production. These were the challenges. Now, talking about the opportunities and future plans, we want to expand the organic region and encourage all members to get into ginger plantation. All 543 members should be encouraged to get into ginger plantation. Similarly, we want to upgrade the processing center. And similarly, we have been planting trees in empty spaces and barren lands for the purpose of mulching, which is required for ginger enterprise. Thus, we have a plan to expand it even more. In this way, I have explained about some of the activities done by our cooperative. Along with this, we have also collected few hopes and expectations, out of which, in order to sell the ginger from the donor agencies, if we get a grant and support, then all of the members would have ease in purchasing the ginger. Similarly, the storage uh, of the ginger would also be greatly helped with the support. This would help us enhance our business. If there is assurance of market, then our work would gain more effectiveness and enable us to expand our business. And similarly, the diversification of the production. If we get some relevant trainings regarding this, then we would be greatly benefited by this. And lastly, women like us from the rural areas, we are allowed in this platform to express our views. I would like to thank you very much for allowing us this opportunity. My heartfelt gratitude for this opportunity. Lastly, if you have any queries, may I request you to put forward those queries. Thank you.
So we will hold questions for the other speakers, but for this speaker, because of the time of night, I think it would be nice for us to allow for questions now and allow her to go home in the middle of the night, her time.
Can we say thank you?
Yes, huge thank you. And huge congratulations to the great work you are doing and your farmers are doing. So do we have any questions online or in person?
So my question is relatively short. My name is Hannah Kyle and I'm from Opportunity International. And I want to echo the congratulations for your wonderful work and very impressive investments and as well as project results. One of the things that we've noticed with groups that we work with is that as they are adopting new technology, there often is a period where the income decreases, right? So there's an initial period where you make less than you did before. I'm wondering if that is your experience, and if it was your experience, why did you continue past that initial decrease in income?
Great question.
दिलमायाजी सुन्नु भएको छ मलाई हजुरले? हजुरको म्युटमा राख्नु छ, माइक अनम्युट गर्नुस् त दिलमायाजी। मलाई सुन्नु भएको छ हजुरले? ए हजुरलाई एउटा प्रश्न सोध्नु भएको छ उहाँले है। उहाँ चाहिँ अपर्च्युनिटी इन्टरनेसनल नामक संस्थाबाट हुनुहुँदो रहेछ। उहाँले चाहिँ तपाईलाई सर्वप्रथम यस्तो राम्रो काम गर्नुभएको रहेछ, त्यसको लागि बधाई दिन चाहन्छु भन्नुभएको छ। अनि साथसाथै कस्तो राम्रो राम्रो नतिजाहरू पनि ल्याउनु भएको रहेछ, त्यसको लागि धन्यवाद दिन चाहन्छु। अनि उहाँ भन्नुहुन्छ, मैले काम गर्ने मेरो अनुभवमा चाहिँ कतिपय समूहहरूमा काम गर्दाखेरि नयाँ नयाँ प्रविधिहरू सिक्दाखेरि चाहिँ सुरुमा आय अथवा जुन आम्दानी हुन्छ, आम्दानी चाहिँ घट्दो रहेछ है। अनि हजुरलाई पनि यस्तो नयाँ किसिमको प्रविधिमा प्रवेश गर्दाखेरि सुरुमा के कस्तो अनुभव रह्यो, अलिकति आम्दानीहरू घट्यो कि घटेन कि, त्यो अलिकति बताइदिनुस् न। एक दुईवटा वाक्य बोल्नुस्, चुप लाग तपाईँ अनि रोकिनुस्, अनि म फेरि अनुवाद गर्छु, अनि फेरि हजुरले गर्नु होला है।
हामीले सुरुमा काम गर्दा त हाम्रै लगानी सहकारीकै लगानी लगाएर काम गरेका थियौँ। त्यतिखेर हामीले मङ्सिरदेखि असारसम्म नै हामीले अदुवा ल्याएर स्टक राख्दा त्यो बेच्दासम्म हामीले त्यतिखेर पूर्ण रूपमा त्यो बेच्नका लागि गाह्रो भएको थियो। त्यतिखेर चाहिँ हाम्रो सहकारीकै रकमहरू प्रयोग गरेर अदुवा खरिद गर्नेदेखि सम्पूर्ण काम गर्दा चाहिँ सहकारीलाई नाफा चाहिँ घट्ने नै रहेछ।
हजुर, म अनुवाद गर्छु अनि फेरि भन्नुहोस्, सोचिरहनुहोस् त्यो बेलामा है त। So she's saying, initially when we started the business, we used the money of the cooperative as the investment. And when we harvested the first lot of ginger, it was very difficult for us to find the market. So yeah, you are right. It is difficult to initially generate income when we get into the new technology. अनि भन्नुहोस् अरू?
अरू चाहिँ हाम्रो यो दिदीबहिनीहरूबाट बचत सङ्कलन गरेको हुन्छौँ नि हामीले प्रत्येक महिना, त्यो बचतहरू पनि त्यही अदुवा खरिदमै तथा अरू बाख्रा खरिद गर्दा नै सबै पैसा त्यहाँ नै लगानी गर्नुपर्ने हुन्छ। त्यतिखेर चाहिँ यताबाट अदुवाहरू स्टक रहने अनि यता दिदीबहिनीहरूलाई पनि लगानी गर्न नपाइने, त्यतिखेर चाहिँ पैसाहरू चाहिँ होल्डमा रहने कि त्यसमाबाट हामीलाई न ब्याज आउँछ न यताबाट अदुवा बिक्री गर्न पाइरह। सोचे जस्तो चाहिँ नाफा चाहिँ नहुने रहेछ सुरुमा चाहिँ सर। काम गर्दै गर्ने क्रममा त्यही अनुभव भएको छ सर।
Yes. Yeah, as per my experience, initially when we started to invest in a ginger plantation or even in good enterprise, all of the savings which was collected from the sister was also utilized for the enterprise. And on one hand, we had harvested these ginger and we had kept a huge stock of it. And the stock was also not getting cleared. And on the other hand, since the saving was also invested in the business, we did not earn any interest out of it. So it was quite difficult for us to hold all these things together and keep working initially.
त्यही कारणले हो हामीलाई यसमा चाहिँ मैले आशा अपेक्षामा मैले पहिला पनि कुरा राखेको थिएँ। कुनै दात्री निकायबाट सहयोग अनुदान पाएको भए त्यो अनुदान चाहिँ हामीले अदुवा खरिदमा या बाख्रा खरिदमा लगाउन पाइन्थ्यो कि भन्ने चाहिँ आशा मैले पहिला पनि राखेको थिएँ। त्यही हो सर। त्यसो गरेको भए हाम्रो दिदीबहिनीहरूबाट उठेको रकम हामीले लगानीमै गर्न पाइन्थ्यो र यता अदुवा खरिद गर्नलाई छुट्टै त्यो निकायबाट सहयोग पाएको भए त्यसबाट पनि हामीले अदुवा खरिद गरिन्थ्यो जस्तो लाग्छ मलाई। त्यही हो सर।
Which is why at the end of my presentation I made a request to the donors to provide us some grants or some money so that we'd be able to invest in the ginger as well as goat enterprise, and the savings could be utilized for the original purpose considering which it was collected.
अरू केही छ सर?
Any more questions or queries?
We are tight on time, so we want to thank you so very, very much. And I'll ask our Heifer Nepal team that might be on the virtual meeting connected to try to see if you can help to answer questions in the chat box that I saw coming up. But Ms. Damaya Saru, we want to thank you so very much for coming in so late at night for you and telling your story. It's such a compelling story and so interesting. And in Nepal, we actually work with over 300,000 farmer families, but this is a really special story of their breaking into organic ginger, and it's been a challenging process, but they're having success. So we wanted to have her tell their story. So thank you, Dhanyavad. Thank you very, very much.
थ्याङ्क यू म्याम सबैजनालाई नमस्कार
दिलमायाजी
Thank
हजुरलाई
you.
धेरै धेरै धन्यवाद भन्नुभएको छ है उहाँले एकदमै राम्रो यति राति पनि यस्तो होइन दुःख गरेर आएर हाम्रो कथाहरू आफ्नो सुनाइदिनु भयो हामीलाई त्यसको लागि धेरै धेरै धन्यवाद अब हेफर नेपालको टिम त्यहाँ होला उहाँले चाहिँ नि सायद तपाईँलाई सहयोग गरेर त्यो च्याटमा एउटा प्रश्न राखेको छ त्यो प्रश्नको उत्तर अहिले अथवा पछि पनि पठाइदिनुहुन्छ होला नेपालमा हाम्रो चाहिँ नि हेफरको 3 लाखवटा परिवारहरू हेफर नेपालमा आबद्ध भएर काम गरिरहेका छन् होइन सदस्यहरू भइरहेका छन् सबैको कथाहरू आफूमै एकदम अनुपम आफूमै पृथक छ तर हजुरको कथा पनि आफैमा एकदमै विशेष कथा हो कसरी तपाईँहरूले चाहिँ यो होइन जिन्जर खेतीमा लागेर अदुवा खेतीमा लागेर एकदम अर्ग्यानिक खेतीमा लागिरहनु भएको छ र गाह्रो भए तापनि कठिनाइहरू आए तापनि सफलताको कथा यहाँहरूले छोड्न सकिरहनु भएको छ त्यसको लागि धेरै धेरै धन्यवाद छ भनेर उहाँले भन्नुभएको छ हजुरलाई
धन्यवाद छ मलाई पनि यसरी ग्रामीण भेगको महिलाहरूबाट मलाई चुनेर यसरी आफ्नो कुरा राख्न दिनुभएकोमा उहाँहरूलाई पनि धेरै धेरै धन्यवाद दिन चाहन्छु अनि पछि हाम्रो यस सहकारी लगायत हाम्रो यहाँ नेपालमा पनि वेलकम गर्न चाहन्छु पछि आउँदालाई सर त्यही भनिदिनु होला
I would also like to thank you very much for considering me as one of the women from the remote areas of Nepal to be able to be present here and express my views and my stories out here. I would like to request you all and I'd like to welcome you all to our area. I would like to request you to physically come to Nepal and visit our cooperative as well. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you. Dhanyavad.
Dhanyavad, Hazur.
I'm going to switch very quickly over to our next speaker because we are tight on time. So our next speaker is Ryan Zinn from Dr. Bronner's. I hope you all have heard of Dr. Bronner's. I'm extremely excited that Ryan is talking to us today. Ryan is the Regenerative Projects Manager for Dr. Bronner's. He focuses on Dr. Bronner's international supply chains. He's worked in the food and farm justice movement at home and abroad for the past 25 years. I think everybody has heard of Dr. Bronner's, but I have come across a couple people that haven't, which is so crazy to me because I'm a huge fan of theirs. What I love about Dr. Bronner's is their values. As you see on their website, they'll say their first ingredient is love, which is so awesome. They lead with their heart. They're really, really a values-based family-run organization, and I might be taking some of Ryan's talking points here, so I won't go on too much, but they use only the purest organic and fair trade ingredients. And really important also in this is that they have a huge value of being fair to their suppliers and with fair pay and good working conditions. And so also they're leading regenerative organic agriculture. So Ryan, I don't want to take your speaking points. I'm going to turn it over to you. And thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much, Devonna. Can everybody hear me okay and see the screen? We're good? Yeah. Okay, great. I will be sure to hire Devonna as my PR spokesperson, going forward. That was a great introduction. Thank you so much. Yeah, so I just want to give you all kind of a brief overview about Dr. Bronner's. If you did not have a crazy vegan uncle or somebody in your family that had maybe some experience with Dr. Bronner's, we're actually a family soap company based in Southern California. And last year, we just completed our 75th anniversary of production in the US. But the family is actually a 5-generation German Jewish soap company where the grandchildren of the original founder, Emanuel Bronner, are actually running the organization. And it's a relatively unique organization. I came actually from the development world and worked in cooperative development in the 90s in Latin America. And I really think that Dr. Bronner's is one of the few organizations from a commercial perspective that I really wanted to work with, in large part because of the values really based within the DNA of the organization. We're not really a small company anymore. This year, we'll do about $220 million in sales. And really the values of the organization really is what drives pretty much all of our operations. So just a quick overview from a high level, our executive pay is capped at 5-to-1, and all of our employees in the United States are provided living wages, benefits, profit sharing, etc. We try to basically apply that throughout our different supply chains. So as you may know, our sort of iconic product is this liquid soap, this Castile soap here on the upper right. But over time, we've really developed a whole host of products and projects. We, in a way, see ourselves more as a supply chain company as opposed to just a consumer brand per se. So I want to talk a little bit about our origin story and our work on the ground. You know, and really our approach is try to be as holistic as possible when it comes to all of our operations. And we can do this in part because we are a family company. There are no shareholders, and ultimately all of our profits after expenses and whatnot go to additional causes. So this year we will contribute about $8 million to a number of different causes globally, here in the United States, including regenerative agricultural, animal welfare, and drug policy reform. And this is reflected in the fact that we, I think, are the highest scoring B Corp on the planet, which is something we're quite proud about. But more specifically, I want to talk about our work on the ground in all of our supply chains. So when David and Mike Bronner, Emmanuel Bronner's grandchildren, took over the company some 15 or so years ago, the decision was made to convert all of our major raw materials to organic. At that time, the Organic Standards Act in the United States was just emerging, and the marketplace was looking for more organic products. So this was actually quite unique in the body care sector to actually prioritize organic ingredients and raw materials. And what we quickly found was that though there are ways we can buy through brokers and intermediaries organic materials, in reality, we had very little insight as to what was happening on the ground, livelihoods for farmers, or if there was actually any integrity in the organic product itself. So that led Dr. Bronner's to do a somewhat unusual approach in this day and age, which was to actually invest in vertically integrated supply chains around the world to be able to supply the vast majority of our raw materials. And we did this within the framework of both organic and fair trade certified. Our understanding was that we wanted to ensure both organic integrity for the end consumer, but also make sure that workers, farmers, including our factory workers, are able to actually have living wages or fair prices for the products that they source. Our priority has always been to work exclusively or directly with small-scale farmers that supply the vast majority of our raw materials. And to date, we work with about 10,000 small-scale farmers throughout the global South and a couple of small-scale farmers here in the United States. And we really focus on prioritizing small-scale farmers in rural communities because we can believe have a bigger impact by working with small-scale farmers as opposed to larger commercial operations or plantations. And this really reflects a lot of our values as well. I don't need to tell all of you sort of the challenges that are facing small-scale farmers in the rural world. Certainly this poly-crisis of climate change, economic disruption, COVID, aging farmers, et cetera, are all having big impacts on farmers. And so while we don't think that there are any one silver bullets, we do think that having direct relationships with small-scale farmers in a transparent and equitable way within a framework of organic and fair trade really makes a big difference. So this really has led us to establish integrated supply chains around the world. And we do this a couple of different ways. Either we own and operate a vertically integrated supply chain like we do in Sri Lanka, India, or Ghana, or we work in joint ventureships, or we actually work with dedicated third-party suppliers where we are the primary, if not the exclusive buyer in many cases. So this just gives you a little bit of an idea of some of our partners around the world. Dr. Bronner's has a dedicated team, of which I am one, where we basically provide what I like to call wraparound services to all of our partners. And this means that we've got a dedicated team that really focuses on everything from agronomy, business development, financial support, obtaining grants and financing is really critical and important. But additionally, we're looking a lot at value addition and diversification on the ground as well. What we found in many cases is that there are many, many hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of small-scale farmers who are actually producing ecologically well and having a big impact in their community. But there are sometimes missing elements. Obviously, access to the marketplace, fair prices certainly are one. The other option often has to deal with things like access to primary processing. Too often, many of these products are exported with no value addition, and this basically continues the cycle of exploitation and extraction. So this gives you a little bit of an idea of the areas from which we work and some of the raw materials that go into a lot of our products. And really our vision in terms of our relationship with all of our partners on the ground starts first with organic. We found that is a great way to get a premium for small scale farmers to enter the marketplace. And there we build on fair trade certification. We want to ensure that farmers' costs of production are covered, and they actually have a margin. This is quite uncommon through the vast majority of agricultural value chains. And so we want to make sure that not only we do this as part of our own practices, but we are actually verified by a third party. In this case, it's fair trade. And then lastly, over time, we've layered on the regenerative organic certification, which was a standard we developed in partnership with Patagonia, the Rodale Institute, and other stakeholders to really build upon organic and fair trade with a special focus on soil health, as we see soil health to be really one of the main drivers, both for climate resiliency, but also a way to actually improve production and address some of the issues regarding climate change and greenhouse gas emissions. On top of that, what we've also noticed that is really, really critical is this issue of economic development in the communities where we work. What we noticed was it's not enough to buy, let's say, coconut oil for our soaps at a fair price, long-term contracts, long-term relationships. But because farmers also grow many, many other crops, it's really critical to ensure that they actually have access to the marketplace, whether it is infrastructure and logistics to be able to service their local food economies, or it's actually focusing on developing additional markets of overseas. And so this is what we've done in a number of different ways. One, by selling to third parties, to companies, for example, that are not related to Dr. Bronner's. For example, we are building out a cassava mill right now in Ghana. And Dr. Bronner's will actually never, ever make a product with cassava, but it's actually critical for the local economy. We want to be able to provide employment and value addition in the community. Similarly, Dr. Bronner's, we are a soap company, but what we found in West Africa where we work is that many of the farmers grow cocoa in addition to oil palm and other crops. And of course, cocoa is one of these really high risk crops. And so to actually ensure that the farmers had a stable marketplace and were receiving a premium for regenerative, organic, and fair production, we actually launched a chocolate line, which is kind of a crazy thing to do for a soap company, but really reflects our desire to be able to support farmers and provide that access to a marketplace. So this just gives you a little bit of an overview of our approach. But our experience has largely been driven upon establishing and working with local teams and expertise on the ground. So all of our projects have great local teams that do the vast majority of the work, and we provide a support and accompaniment role. And this includes everything from agricultural extension, managing all of our compliance issues like organic, fair, and regenerative certification, the development and diversification of additional markets, as well as many of the fair trade and economic development projects that we do. So we try our best not to micromanage any of these projects, despite our sort of stake and investment in these projects themselves, but really work closely with local partners. And this allows us to be able to engage and really enhance the work that is done on the ground as best as possible. Similarly, what we have found is that one of the main bottlenecks for sort of rural development in many cases is just functional local infrastructure to provide employment and value addition. And this is certainly true for the vast majority of the raw materials that we buy. And so our particular case, we made the decision to actually invest in local mills, distillery units, and additional processing to be able to provide employment and value addition. And this allows for us to have transparency and ensure that everybody within the supply chain is compensated fairly. So through both our own work and that of our certifier, we look to ensure that not only this family farmer is compensated fairly, but that as well of the farm workers, whether they be maybe temporary workers, for example, that help out during harvest or establishment. But we also are scrutinized for the work that is done at all of our mills and facilities. And this is one thing that I feel is often missing in the rural development debate, in large part because a lot of times factory workers are often overlooked, in particular in agriculture. So our fair trade certification actually evaluates that as well. And this allows for us to be able to leverage much of the production and absorb as much that farmers can produce. The marketplace has been really shaky, of course, thanks in fact to COVID and the most recent economic crisis. So having additional insight and management on the ground in terms of production is absolutely really, really critical. And then really, I want to say that, our sort of focus primarily is advancing regenerative organic agriculture, oftentimes in the context of diversified multi-strata agroforestry. What we've found is that in many cases, since the vast majority of the raw materials that we purchase and use in our soaps and other products come from perennial systems, what we found was in many cases, economic drivers, bad extension over the years from either government or agrochemical companies, or many other factors really led small-scale farmers in some cases to really employ, sort of extractive monocultural approaches to production. And so what we've done is a couple of things, both in terms of providing ongoing training, in some cases actually sort of reactivating a lot of the indigenous knowledge with regards to agroforestry, but in other cases providing training, financing for sure, and making sure that we can figure out and unpack some of the land tenure challenges that farmers face. And then lastly, it's looking to actually slot some of this production into marketplaces. So what we have found, for example, we had one project in Samoa, we were able to access some World Bank funding, which was fantastic. We planted 600 hectares of dynamic agroforestry, which was fantastic. Farmers were able to produce coconut and other crops for cash crops, but then they were sort of like stuck with a plethora of things like papaya and other fruit crops that needed a market outlet. So what we tried to do is be able to provide and facilitate that access to the local marketplace to be able to focus on food security. But we really think that revisiting the design that farmers are taking by providing extension and training and other incentives can actually address a number of major issues, one of which is livelihoods in the communities, being able to produce more on less land, certainly buffering against climate shocks, and also to provide sort of a pathway for young farmers. One thing that's been really critical that we're seeing is aging farmers around the world, not just in the United States. And this is something that is really critical and has been on our radar. So for example, in Ghana, I believe the last statistics were the average age of farmers were upwards of about 56 to 57 years old. And for many rural communities, average lifespan is only about 60. So we need to make sure that we can actually support farmers as they age out, provide them a good livelihood and a pathway for young farmers as well. And then lastly, one of the things that we've realized is through our fair trade framework, it's quite not enough to have fair prices for production, but you need to be able to provide additional services. And this really reflects our values. Of course, this is something that we believe in really strictly at Dr. Bronner's, but we also see this as really critical as we look to support rural communities. And this really focuses on everything from, for example, the development of a Montessori school here on the bottom right in Ghana, obviously education, and healthcare are really critical in many of the rural communities where we work. And then lastly, on the upper right, I just want to flag the work that we're doing on plastic recycling. We started a pilot there. And though Dr. Bronner's was the first company to pioneer 100% post-consumer recycled plastic, quite frankly, it's not enough in our experience. And so what we want to do is to try to take responsibility for all of the plastic that we produce by focusing on economic development and plastic recycling in the rural communities with where we work. And so that's just a little bit of an overview of some of the sort of fair trade and social and economic development projects that we are working on. And with that, I will pass it on. There's a lot to talk about, but I know there's other speakers, and I just want to thank you all for your time. I really appreciate it, and I look forward to the question and answers. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Brian. That was great. Turn it over to you.
Thank you. So our next speaker, Noel Gerwig, who is a Senior Land and Climate Advisor in the Natural Climate Solutions Division at USAID, where he's been based for 3 years. Prior to this, Noel served in USAID's Office of Global Climate Change as the team lead and a senior advisor before that for the Sustainable Landscapes, providing strategic guidance to USAID's activities, focused on land use and land management. He's also held positions at Stanford University, State Department, and Smithsonian Environmental Research Center, amongst others. Noel also holds a PhD and a master's degree from Cornell University. Noel, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much both for the, I guess I just keep my mic on.
Thank you very much both for the invitation and for everybody coming. I had some slides I was going to present, but I think there's enough redundance between what I had and what other people have said that I'm not going to bother with the slides. I'm just going to speak for a few minutes. I wanted to start just by thinking about what sustainable and regenerative agriculture mean. It's so context dependent, right? We all have our ideas and in our mind about what it means. And I was so glad to hear the people who've spoken so far talk about finance, about community well-being, about gender, as well as about soil and the biophysical aspects. I sit at USAID in a, just give me 1 second, get the right notes here so that I'm somewhat coherent here. Thank you. I sit in a team called the Natural Climate Solutions Division, which used to be part of the Global Climate Change Office. We have another, we've reorganized since. We also have a part of the agency that is focused much more on smallholder, and the team that I sit on is focused on greenhouse gas emissions, on reducing greenhouse gas emissions from the land. A lot of the work that we do is about avoiding tropical deforestation. Much of that is driven by agricultural commodity supply chains. So that's one of the reasons we work with agriculture. We also work with agriculture because agriculture is both a source of greenhouse gas emissions and it's an opportunity to sequester carbon in the soil. So that's the reason our particular team works with agriculture in both on plots, but much more often on broader landscapes and with lots of different actors, and I'll talk about that a little bit. We have another part of the agency that is focused much more on smallholder agriculture and economic development of smallholders, particularly in highly impoverished countries. And I think that that's maybe more what some of the other speakers are talking about. I just wanted to be clear that what I'm going to talk about most is not reflecting the whole of USAID. It's reflecting the part of USAID that is focused on reducing greenhouse gas emissions from the land, keeping us within the 1.5 to 2 degree targets, and the way that agriculture influences that. So, when we think about how to conserve and manage and restore ecosystems and reduce greenhouse gas emissions, we are certainly working with biophysical features of the land, but we're thinking about what kind of information and systems are necessary. How much transparency is there? Something that came up a minute ago, into those systems, both for governments, also for civil society, and particularly, we're living at a moment in history where there are many corporations making forward-facing commitments, both to conserve biodiversity, to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions, and many of them have commitments to various sustainable development goals also. So what is needed and smallholders are ultimately often implicated in the supply chains of these companies. We're thinking about finance, right? So do we need catalytic capital? Do we need to enable communities? We have a project in Mexico where we've supported communities to build their capacity to generate deforestation-free agriculture, and then coupling that with committed offtake of carbon credits by corporates. So that kind of partnership is something that you'll see a lot at USAID. One of the pieces that we often see absent from agriculture development projects, and we're seeing exceptions to that today already, is addressing forest land governance, particularly in landscapes where agriculture is driving deforestation. And we hear a lot about sustainable agriculture, and have been hearing a lot about that for 40 years now, maybe. We hear a lot in the last decade, I'd say, about sustainable intensification. And I don't think I've heard that phrase yet today. Maybe I missed it. But the idea is, if you can produce more food on a particular plot of land, then you need less land. And there's lots of different practices that you need to employ in order to make that sustainable, in addition to avoiding deforestation. Addressing the biophysical piece of that by itself is often what we see, and it's generally not enough. Generally, we see that when you intensify agricultural production, you increase profitability, which is great for economic development, it's good for food security. It's not so great if what you want to do is avoid tropical deforestation, because inevitably profitability goes up, then you have more incentive to expand and grow more food on the next hectare of land. So part of what we did is in our team a couple of years ago was do a kind of look at what are the kinds of governance policies that one could put in place and incorporate into an agricultural development activity. And we've been to these into broad government functions like fiscal policy and trade policy, which influence the kind of agriculture and the extent of agriculture that you see. We also thought about market systems approaches like supporting payment for ecosystem services programs, like supporting communities to engage in forest-based enterprises, and encouraging the adoption of performance standards. And then the third basket of this in this governance approach was looking at government property rights and government support of land tenure and property rights, which we've heard talked about today also. And there's a whole slew of those. So the general piece of this activity and this analysis and set of guidance that we produced was, when you are looking at sustainable intensification, look beyond the plot, work with cooperatives, work at landscape scales, and work not only on the agricultural lands, but the other parts of the landscape and what kinds of land governance, forest lands governance through these different lenses is going to be needed. Can I get just a quick time check?
6 minutes and 10 seconds.
Okay. Look at the wrong person. One other activity that I think might be of interest, something we launched a couple of years ago called the Forest Data Partnership, and also focused on this, addressing the challenge of agricultural commodity-driven deforestation, which is a dominant driver of tropical deforestation around the world. This is a partnership with USAID, the World Resources Institute, the UN Food and Agriculture Organization, Google, NASA, and Unilever. And the impetus for this particular activity is that, again, there are all of these forward-facing commitments, and now we also have the European Union Deforestation Regulation, which we can talk about a little bit later if you want, which means that every commodity that is likely to drive deforestation that is imported into the European Union is going to have to be traced back to a particular plot of land, and to be able to show that that imported product is not associated with deforestation, which is a very hard thing to do. And because you think about these supply chains, and we've been hearing about these too, going all the way from smallholder farmers, and there are many smallholder farmers, all the way to retailers, there are many retailers. There's a few choke points in the middle of that where there aren't that many. But all along the way, there's a lot of different actors. So being able to have that level of transparency and traceability into supply chains is not easy. We have much better data than we did a decade ago about land use and land use change, much of it from satellites. But different organizations use different data sets. Different organizations have different tools that interpret those data. Those tools don't talk to each other very well. So that whole reason and kind of theory of change of this particular activity, and not that more data is going to solve this problem by itself, right? It's one piece of the puzzle, is to try to align all these different actors around what good data looks like, to provide some benchmark data that everybody can use to test their data sets around this, to do this with also understanding and respecting the data privacy concerns that are associated. You can imagine you might not want the coordinates of all these different smallholders accessible to everybody. So this particular activity, we have several different stages. We have something we call the engage stage. That's what it says, to engage all of the different actors. We start with this core group of partners that I outlined a minute ago, but our idea is that this is going to be a much, much broader community, to then align, to get everybody aligned around what does good traceability and transparency look like. Doesn't mean everybody has to use the same map, but at least what does a good map look like? We have an Innovate task force, which says although we have a lot more data than we had 10 years ago, there are still gaps in these data. Cocoa is a good example. Really tough to have good data on where is cocoa and where is not cocoa, just because of what those landscapes look like and what the sensing tools that we have do. So we want to be able to fill some of those gaps. We want to be able to innovate and fill some of those data gaps. And ultimately, we want to then be able to deploy some of these solutions that we are coming up with. I'm going to stop there, leave some additional time maybe for others or for questions. I think if there's any last words I wanted to offer here. There's a whole range of other activities that USAID is engaged in, that our team is engaged in around low emissions agriculture and what that means for development in particular. We've done some activities with investment plans on low irrigation rice. We've done feasibility analyses on low emissions livestock in East Africa. We have pulled together groups of low and middle income countries to think about what support they need to do better reporting on their agricultural based emissions, which enables them to have better access to climate finance. I just wanted to provide you with a couple of more specific examples as kind of a way into a conversation.
Awesome. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
All right, our final speaker, who's been waiting very patiently, Julian Lampietti, is the Manager for Global Engagement in the Agriculture and Food Global Practice at the World Bank. His responsibilities include strategic planning, donor outreach and oversight for global knowledge and advisory programs. Julian has published books and journal articles on a broad range of topics, including poverty, economics, agriculture, food security, logistics, and energy. I also did enjoy your blog on the Salu Bakery here in DC, called Buttering the Bread on Both Sides, Going Local with Our Food Supply Chain. He has a PhD in public policy from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, and a master's in natural resources economics from Duke University. Julian, the floor is all yours.
Thanks, Adrian. Thank you for having me. Thank you for inviting me. I'm trying to think about what the most useful thing I can tell you. The World Bank is this giant organization. So I think what I'd like to share with you is a little bit my vision where I'm trying to take this behemoth of an institution and what we're thinking about and focusing on now. And these are sort of ideas about the directions we're going in. Just to tell you a little bit about myself, I love this whole regenerative farming thing. I have a farm in Virginia, an hour away from here where I grew up, and I still run that farm, and I try to practice all of these things, and I don't make any money doing it. I lose money. In fact, I farm subsidies more than anything else, but I do have practical experience doing this, and neither of my parents was ever able to make a living on this. I also teach at Georgetown, and I teach a class in the School of Foreign Service, and the name of the class basically tells you what it's about. That they say you are what you eat. Can what you eat change the world? So it actually all starts with each one of us and how we think about food. Now let's get to the World Bank. We are extremely focused on this issue of food security, which has not been talked about so much in this meeting, but is part of the title of the meeting or the announcement. Mm-hmm. And you know, as an economist, when you think about food security, right, there's something called Engel's Law, which is the single largest share of income is spent on food, depending on where you are in the income distribution. So the poorer you are, the more money you spend on food as a share of your total. The universal law. And what that means is the easiest way to make people better off is to make food cheap. Okay, and if you think about it, the very raison d'etre of public policy since ancient Mesopotamia, where agriculture started, was actually partly to make food cheap and make sure it was available, because that is what made people happy and made them better off. And so when you have the kind of situation we've been seeing the last decade and a half, right? We have two food crises that occurred where there's been this rapid increase in the price of food because you had some events that occurred that started destabilizing things. And weirdly today we have more people going hungry by let's take the general definitions of FAO or whatever you want, and have almost 1 billion people that are facing some sort of hunger, 350 million of them that are acutely food insecure. Those numbers are bigger than ever before we're also producing more food than ever before, right? So you have this very fundamental imbalance in our system. And what we're saying at the World Bank is, in order to have food security, you have to have food systems transformation. If we stand any chance to reach SDG 2 as a goal by 2030, we have to not only work on the flow of food and who it's getting to and how much they're getting and all that kind of stuff, but we need to work on the stock of how we produce that food, right? So it's just like a fruit tree. You got to take care of the fruit tree if you want the fruit. And in our situation, public policy for the last thousands of years, I would argue, has been making the farmers mine the soil, mine the water resources, and mine everything, because actually the real sort of objective has been to drive down that price. And we are starting to see severe costs. Think about it. The Middle East was the birthplace of agriculture. Well, there's almost no agriculture there. Go to the Euphrates and all of those places. It is devastating. We have just taken and destroyed everything, and not intentionally, but through the course of what we're doing. So what are we trying to do about this, right? So we've tried to create this massive new program in the World Bank that says, in order to achieve food security, you need food systems transformation. So let's work on both of these things. On the food security side, there's a lot of work going on about getting ready early, helping countries prepare, have financial instruments that allow them to distribute money when there's crises that hit and food prices start spiraling. Social protection, as we call it. And we know there's huge demand in countries for that. And early warning systems and all sorts of cool stuff. Now, on the agriculture and food side of things, we're trying to look more at how do we provide the right incentives so people manage their natural resources and their soil and their water in a way that's friendly. And remember, agriculture accounts for 30% of climate emissions. It's the leading source, loss of biodiversity, leading source of water pollution. We can bend the arc on this thing. We can be a major source of carbon sequestration. We can be a major source of clean water. We can be a major home for biodiversity, right? If we just change the way we're doing things. So where's the money to do this? Well, governments of the world are spending $800 billion a year subsidizing their agriculture sector. And most of that money goes to things that are actually bad for everything I just talked about. Right? They're bad for the environment, bad for climate change, so on and so forth. And they may make you money, but they're probably bad for you too, because you're producing food that isn't actually very good. Like, subsidize sugar. Sugar does nothing for you. I love sugar, don't get me wrong, it tastes good. But why should the government use our money to subsidize people to produce poison for all of us? Okay, that, doesn't make sense. So, the first big pot of money is actually the money that's already being spent. And how do we get those governments to change the way they think about it, right? And if you think about the US and the Inflation Reduction Act, and all of a sudden there's all this money pouring in for people like me to say, well, I actually want to take a more climate smart approach and I'll get a little more money from the government, but I can reduce my yields and manage that process better. So how do we get governments all over the world to start doing things like this? That's a huge focus for an institution like us. The second big pot of money that's out there is the climate funds, right? So Green Climate Fund, the Italian Climate Fund, these hundreds of these things. And the Green Climate Fund in Korea has, I think, $12 billion. The US just pledged an additional $3 over the weekend. It's sitting there. 4% of climate fund money is going to the agriculture and food sector. That's producing 30% of the emissions. So there's this weird disproportionality in terms of the impact of the sector and the amount of that money that it's receiving. And that could be a huge source of concessionality. So we have a program where we're working with the Green Climate Fund and others to basically reduce the transaction costs of wholesaling these kinds of projects that repurpose government public expenditures and connect that source of concessionality that's in those funds with governments and champions who want to do more. And then the third thing we're doing is we're working on financial instruments that we call outcome bonds. And the idea of those bonds is, okay, how can we get some private sector investors, or impact investors, high net worth individuals who believe in this stuff, and they can buy a bond that says, okay, we're going to get X number of tons per carbon in the soil through this project, and then they're willing to basically forego the interest on the bond. So maybe they would make 3.5%. There's a market for carbon that they could eventually sell those carbon credits for. They're willing to forego the carbon credit value, and that shows up as a grant for the people that are basically, the bank is selling the bonds, but the project is at a country level, and they get a grant of that difference between, say, 3.5 and 5.5, or whatever you can do over the 4-year period. So how do we do outcome bonds around regenerative agriculture? I have two more things. Okay. So one, and I think you mentioned this, MRVs, right? The MRVs in the ag space are just not up to speed. So you can't really create all of these financial instruments unless you have a really good system to monitor, report, and verify all of it. So we're working on that, but we need everyone to work on that if we want to get there. Second, sustainable, regenerative, climate smart, food security, like the first three are all great, but they're, no one has an agreed definition. And I think that's the point Noel made, right? So, what I say is the regenerative versus what Noel says are not the same thing necessarily. And everyone wants the label, and no one wants to be held to a specific standard. And that runs us into this whole difficult space of greenwashing and other things that can happen. So I will stop there. Check out this movie, Common Ground. Who's seen the movie Common Ground? I was at the opening in DC like 2 weeks ago. So we're actually working with those guys around how do we use that platform and those people to start bringing attention to things like outcome bonds around regenerative agriculture. And I'll stop there. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Put the floor to questions. I know we're running over time. We'll give it just a few minutes for questions. To our last three speakers, open the floor in person as well as online.
Question at the back.
Hi, thanks. Can you hear me okay?
If you could speak up, that would be great.
Awesome.
Thank you, and introduce yourself.
Okay, hi, I'm Eva Christensen. I'm an agroecologist, and I've been working as a food security and agroecology advisor for about 25 years. I've worked for USAID at least 3 times. I've worked for several NGOs, and I've owned and created 2 of my own companies. So I know the private sector pretty well too. I have 2 questions. The first one is for our gentleman representing the soap. I'm curious, and I think that others here, I love your company too, by the way. But I think that others here would also like to know, you mentioned about being able to collect and reactivate local indigenous agroecological practices. And I think that's something that's really important and frequently overlooked. We often go with a whole set of practices and a whole set of technologies that we call new technologies that are really based on old school traditional practices. So if you could comment on that, that would be great.
Sure, I will try to be brief. I think this is really all very site specific. So for example, working in Polynesia, there is almost like, many, many thousands of years of unbroken, sort of experience in agroforestry and polycultures that we basically are able to help support, build upon, and optimize. In other places where you have, I would say, probably market drivers and other factors that really make it challenging for farmers to grow in an agroecological way. There is some really sort of like hidden knowledge there. And I think there's a couple of different ways that we focused on really bringing that out. One is providing the right economic and social conditions so that farmers can actually practice agroecology, I think is really, really critical. As the other speakers have pointed out, when we talk about climate change and regenerative agriculture, too often we focus on one sort of like tactical intervention, like compost or cover crops or whatever. And all of that is great, but functionally, I think the most important thing is the social capital really as a departure point. So I've, at least in my own personal experience, I think the best sort of approach has been to gather farmers together. It's been sort of like overplayed now, but I think the farmer to farmer model is really valuable. And having some facilitation there that really focuses on tackling real life issues. So for example, cocoa in West Africa is extremely challenging to do organically or without external inputs. And so looking at those types of cultural practices and really being able to support those champion farmers that are pushing it forward. So that has been really sort of the jumping off point in most cases. But I think it's kind of a combination of facilitating engagement with small farmers, tackling really practical things that have an impact in farmers' lives, providing that technical support or financial support in some cases, and ensuring that the economic and social conditions are in place to actually allow that to flourish. So that's just a really general response, but that's been our experience.
No, that's great. And just as an aside, I've also done farmer to farmer projects.
Me too.
Just by coincidence. But so my second question is for the remaining guests, actually. We talk a lot, especially at USAID, we talk about intensifying production, producing more. We have 8 to almost 9 billion people on the planet now. We need to produce more. How can we do that? We so infrequently talk about reducing waste and loss at a rate of 40 to 45-ish% globally. And the methane that's generated by all of the food that goes in landfills in more developed countries, and the foods that never make it to market, let alone to the rest of the village. And so I guess my question for the two donors is, why don't we have more specific focus? I did see some in the new climate, what was it called?
Climate
New climate
strategy.
strategy, thank you. The new climate strategy that I mentioned once or twice, addressing waste and loss, but none of the IPs are doing it at a very large scale. I think they don't see it as sexy. They don't see it as we're feeding people, but it is, and so how can we address this? How can we encourage it more? Where's the funding to reduce the loss and waste problems for food security and for climate?
Great question. Tough question. Have you ever worked in Egypt?
Not Egypt, but close
All
by.
right, so I'm just going to describe a scene to you guys. You can understand what part of the problem is. So in Egypt, they subsidize bread. Subsidize very cheap. And if you go to the poor neighborhoods at a certain time of the day, there's bread everywhere, all over the street. Those of you that have worked in Egypt have probably seen this if you've been in those neighborhoods. It's being fed to the animals, the cattle. Huge amount of waste among some of the poorest people in the world, right? Why does that happen? So as an economist, right, it's because it's too cheap. Right? If it were worth more, people wouldn't waste it as much. Now we can spend a lot.
Did you just tell us the way to fix it was make food cheaper?
That's not what I said. That what you heard me say?
That's what I heard you say, yeah.
When?
Food has to be cheaper, yeah.
No, that was the theory.
You
That was the economic.
Yeah.
So to make people better off, everyone has believed that you need to make food cheaper, is what I said. I didn't say I believe you need to make food cheaper.
Right, fair enough,
The
sorry.
point I was trying to make on all of this is we either have to pay the farmers to produce the environmental values, or we have to give people money to spend more money on their food so the prices reflect more the economics of the natural resources. But I definitely don't believe food should be cheaper myself, but all my clients do. All the governments I work with, that is number one. We have spent a lot of time developing an economic framework for thinking about food loss and waste in developing countries. It's generally taking place at the farm gate, on the field, and in the supply system, and in the developed countries, it actually takes place at the home, right? So there's very distinct places and patterns, and we've done a lot of modeling on all of this, but they're not asking for it. Fundamentally, and we have all the tools, we have global champions, so on and so forth, but it's not an agenda that people are coming and saying we want. And maybe because it falls between cracks. It's not the Minister of Agriculture, it's not the Minister of this or the Minister of that. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I've been sitting here being grateful that Julian went first, so I could have a chance to mull for a minute about how I want to jump into it, because it's not I can answer this in a quite defensive way, frankly, saying here's all the things that USAID is doing around food loss and waste. So I'm going to start with that and say my intention is not to be defensive, and if it comes across that way, I apologize. I will flip to the other side of this in just a moment. So I'll start just with a personal view of this, which is food loss and waste is part of the demand side driver set, in the food and ag system, right? Another is dietary trajectories. And I think the first time I really encountered this as a part of the food system was maybe in, I'm going to say 15 years ago at a set of briefings at the World Bank about one of the IPCC reports, and the chapter lead for the ag chapter in the IPCC report stood up and had this slide showing all these different agricultural practices and the greenhouse gas emission reductions you could get from each one. And each practice, there was this teeny little decline. The next presentation was a person who'd done a much quicker and dirtier report by Climate Focus. And they had 3 bars on their graph. And the first bar was all of those practices from the first one combined into one. The second bar was reducing food loss and waste. And the third bar was changing diets. And each of those was a equally large step. And in intervening 15 years or so, we've seen, I think, increasing focus in the IPCC reports and elsewhere on demand side drivers and how critical they are to addressing both food security and a range of environmental services, including climate change. I think that the global methane pledge, and you were mentioning the focus on methane, has certainly driven that attention at USAID, and part of it is because we are caught between what can appear to be conflicting priorities of food security, climate change, energy. So when it looks like there's a place where you can actually achieve those multiple objectives through one set of activities, one set of investments, where multiple funding streams, each with their own congressional constraints, can be brought to bear, everybody gets very excited about it. So there actually is quite a bit of work on food loss and waste going on at USAID. The two that I can think of right off the bat is Feed the Future has a set of research activities with US research universities. They're called Feed the Future Innovation Labs. There is one specifically on food loss and waste. You might be familiar with it. The US government also announced $10 million recently to launch a new program to reduce food loss and waste. I think this is USAID in combination with the State Department. So there certainly is activity. Now, you might have better visibility than I do into all of the different in-country programs, each of which has multiple components, and it's possible that all of these higher level initiatives and research initiatives have not trickled down, in part for the reasons that Julian was talking about, and in part just because that kind of trickle takes a little while sometimes.
Thank you. Thank you. Carol?
I'm Carol Moore. I work for Heifer International. Julian, I took down notes on the 3 buckets of where the most of the money is situated for this. And I'm curious, if you extended your list to 10, would multinational corporations in the food and beverage industry be a source of money, even if you expanded your list to 10?
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that, but let me sort of give you a response that may be frames it slightly differently. We have a food system that connects 600 million farms about to 8 billion consumers, right? And each one of those farms is a private entity, and there's millions of upstream businesses that are supplying them, and even millions and millions of downstreams that are moving the food from the farm gate through the system and to your table, essentially. That I'm certain is the largest private sector that exists. And then there's a few big companies out there that are totally dominating it. And so, yes, I suspect you're probably right, but the way I was framing this issue of these bonds is, so you have this enormous private sector. I don't care if it's the multinationals or, Bill Gates or Sergey Brin or anyone else, private, as long as they're putting money to the goals, we can create the instruments to bring more concessionality to get people to forego maybe a little bit of those yields that they can get by pouring a bag of nitrogen on. I mean, there is no doubt if you pour that bag of nitrogen on your field, you're going to get a boom in yields, right? You have to forego that if you want to have more sustainability and less impact on climate. And so we got to get people there, and we got to get some concessionality, more concessionality into the system to try to make that happen. And so there's an enormous private sector. I think we can get more of that money channeled into the space. And so companies like Dr. Bronner's can operate under less duress and make their business model work and do good things. And we want governments to change incentives and provide rewards for people who do those things.
I think we can take one more question if there's another. Great.
Hi, Matthew Bear, ACBI Boca. And I think both of you mentioned about data and monitoring systems. And when we talk about agriculture, there's the climate impact, which we know we can measure in greenhouse gas emissions. And it's difficult to measure that, but we know what the indicator is of the CO2 equivalent. On the other side of it, though, especially with smallholder agriculture, most producers are much more vulnerable to climate than they produce in emissions. What are some good measurement frameworks that you've seen that can accurately measure the climate vulnerability of smallholders or producers so that we can learn how to improve that for them?
You get to go first this time, so I can think about it. You Google it.
Also measurement frameworks for, and I have Googled it, unfortunately, there's not a lot out there, but measurement frameworks for the impact that the practices make, right? Because I think it's twofold, right? One is like, definitely we know they're vulnerable, but how do we know they're vulnerable, right? And the second is, if we're really working on climate projects with smallholder farmers, how do we then sort of start that database dialogue with everyone in this room saying this is the impact that they can have?
Right, it's so easy to claim that anything that you do is making them less vulnerable. We say plant a few trees as a riparian buffer or as a windbreak or something like that. And yes, that probably does make them less vulnerable, but there's a limited amount of funding to implement these resilience strategies. And I think that we don't really know very well, like which ones work better than others and which ones are more cost effective than others. So how do we kind of evaluate those options?
So mostly my answer is pretty short, which is I think you're right. And I think that, many people at USA would agree that you're right, that it's much harder to define to quantify what resilience means. And then to be able to link that to not just one intervention, but different sets of interventions. And there's some that are easier, and you gave the tree example, and I might say, trees can have a variety of different impacts, one of which is they're going to be more resistant to drought, as with perennial, grasses, because they've got deeper roots, but also they provide shade, so they provide shade for livestock. So they increase resilience in a variety of different ways. USAID has certainly invested a lot over the years and continues to invest a lot in breeding, and in genetics for more heat tolerant varieties. We could talk about, is that how effective are those different approaches relative to each other, and really thinking about them either or is probably not the right way. I'm happy to look into this more and get back to you and see if I can find a better answer. My general impression is, I don't know that we have any better answer than you do.
Yeah, I think this is something that we're working on in the field, and we're working together, all of us, in our own respective organizations, different donors, funding, to try to figure this out. So having a collection of information on that, though, would be very beneficial.
Just a quick follow-up.
Let me add one piece first, and I'm trying to speak fast because I'm cognizant of.
Yeah,
time,
we're
but I think
gonna
I'm
close after this.
slow down my pace a little bit. One, this is not an approach I've seen taken very often, and I'm speaking more for myself than for the agency right now, but I have seen cases where country programs will look, focused on food security, will look at what they're doing and say, given what we're seeing in the climate projections, these areas in this particular country, we don't see how anybody is going to be able to grow food there regardless of what set of practices. And let's think about different ways of supporting the populations in those places and boosting up food production over here and increasing the transport corridors. And I'm just offering that as an example of, if we're thinking about resilience, I think you were talking, maybe I'm inferring too much about, a particular plot of land, a particular community, what can we do to boost the resilience of food production in that community? And I think sometimes it's worth taking a bit of a step back, and it connects back to the question on food loss and waste, right? If you can reduce food loss and waste in that community, then you don't need to produce quite as much, and if you can't bounce back from that hit, you're in better shape.
Sadly, I think southern Bangladesh is an example of that.
Maybe let Julian come
Oh,
back
sorry.
and,
Yep, and then we're wrapping up.
yeah.
Yeah, so I think I agree with everything he says. So it's a very complex problem. I suspect the additional point I'd make is there's probably huge amounts of indigenous knowledge out there about the things you can plant on your farm that will actually allow you to be more resilient and all these kinds of things. There are sort of standard measures of things like soil moisture, right? That's a really good indicator of what's going to happen to you. And so, and then of course we know about weather data. You're probably all checking your iPhone. I check my iPhone religiously to see what's happening on my farm because we've been in a drought since July, and all the springs ran dry and all the cows were thirsty. We had to rig up alternate. So there's lots of ways to prepare people for these events, for give them the resources to undertake mitigating actions, whether it's terracing or any number of other things. I don't think there's like a marginal cost curve of the effectiveness of those things. And, the complexity of doing that is significant, but maybe worth undertaking. The other point I would make is, at the end of the day, most of these hunger situations, these acute hunger situations, I think 20 of the 22 that are out there in the world today are in conflict situations. Okay, there's food out there, whether it's not in the country because they're having a drought. There's food out there that someone that wasting it can, send these people, and there's food that people are willing to deliver to these people also. But the problem is if the government or whoever is fighting with someone else and they're blocking those corridors that would be so nice to set up. I mean, was it Amartya Sen, right? There's never been a famine in a functioning democracy. I think is what he said. Never in the history of mankind. So you gotta, it's not the weather that's causing the hunger here. I mean, it exacerbates it, but it's the politics that drive it.
So on that note, we have gone way over. We want to thank all of our wonderful speakers. Spread your knowledge. Today is World Soil Day, so we'll end on the soil note of that soil is the base of all agriculture and it needs to be healthy. Hopefully we're all working in that, working to that end. We have lunch. We apologize for keeping everybody over. Hope you'll join us for lunch. And those online, thank you. Thank you for your time. Thank you for engaging. And we look forward to collaborating and connecting with you guys more.